You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 14th of November 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, we will speak with Bloomberg's national security correspondent Natalia Drozdiak in Washington, who's been busy covering the Pentagon and other agencies despite this.
It used to be, Mr. President, the press could go pretty much anywhere in the Pentagon, the most classified area in the world. Or also that if they sign on to the credentialing, they're not going to try to get soldiers to break the law by giving them classified information. So it's common sense stuff, Mr. President.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth there. After that, we'll head to Italy, where Giorgia Meloni has been stubbornly attempting to implement a migrant deal with Albania. And then we'll have both of Monocle's editors, Andrew Tuck and Josh Fennert, on the show. They'll talk about a whole host of upcoming projects and why soft power is alive and well. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. And a happy Friday to all of our listeners. You've almost made it to the weekend, but we're very happy that you're joining us today on The Briefing. We'll start the show in Washington, D.C., where, depending on what you make of statements and military movements in the past week or so, could be gearing up for war. Donald Trump's peace through strength mantra of the past year is being put to the test in the Caribbean, where an aircraft carrier strike group has arrived. Then there's also the administration's threats of strikes against Nigeria. But are Trump's own supporters on board with the administration's more aggressive stance in diplomacy and conflict, essentially? That's what we're going to be discussing now with Natalia Drozdiak, U.S. National Security and Intelligence reporter for Bloomberg in Washington, D.C. Natalia, good morning to D.C.
Good morning. Hey, Chris. How's it going?
Very good. Gang, thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate you taking some time early, 7 a.m. over there in D.C. And I wanted to start with maybe just painting us a picture, if you could. What is it like right now covering agencies like the Pentagon, the State Department for that matter as well? You've been frozen out of the Pentagon, as have other mainstream media outlets. So how do you go about your job?
Yeah, so Bloomberg refused to sign this new policy that would have, made it more restrictive for us to report and to reach out to sources. So we decided not to sign that, like many other news outlets, and ended up leaving the building. But it's really not going to change, that we are going to continue rigorously covering the Department of Defense and everything it does, even if we're not sitting inside it. And just, because you played that clip from Hegseth, we were never allowed to go inside classified areas. So just to make that very clear. But it was, it is interesting that this Department of Defense has had a different approach towards media than we've seen in past administrations, where they were briefing journalists multiple times a week, and since the start of Trump's administration, that barely happened. I mean, I think maybe once or twice at the most. So in that respect, it's not like we'll be missing out on many briefings, most likely.
And just to jump in there, Natalia, I mean, is that something that you've seen just at the Pentagon, or is that similar in, say, the State Department as well? Have they also, even if they haven't frozen you out of the building, have they limited briefings, or do you get a little more traction there?
Well, that's what's interesting. I mean, it's been mostly business as usual. They're still briefing journalists on a regular basis. I think there's press briefings once or twice a week. So, it's just interesting how there's different approaches across the different agencies there.
And so with that in mind, then, as you're trying to go about building a picture still in Washington, D.C., talking to sources, we are curious to kind of get a sense of what the word is in Washington, especially on this military buildup in Venezuela, or in the Caribbean, rather, off the coast of Venezuela. I mean, is there an expectation right now? Is there talk in D.C. that actual fresh strikes are coming or imminent?
Well, those have been the rumors for the last few weeks now that that we could see some sort of an escalation from what we've already been seeing for the last few months, where they've been striking these drug boats or these boats that they claim are carrying drugs and ferrying narcotics towards the United States. And there's anticipation that they may now try to strike land targets in Venezuela, but we still haven't seen any concrete action yet. It seems that the president is considering his options, and it's, a bit of a balance that they need to strike because, they don't want to get engaged and get embroiled in these long enduring wars, which they claim their predecessors have been. And so they're trying to project military power, but in a way that they're not getting sucked into these long wars. So
Well,
that's kind of the internal debate that they're having at the moment.
that is absolutely the internal debate at the moment. And I guess that goes into also the intent of this. Are we any closer to understanding that when it comes to Venezuela, particularly because if this were, say, about regime change, that is a much longer thing. If it is about targeting narcotics and sort of drug gangs in Venezuela, even on Venezuelan land, that might be a bit shorter.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because I think, it's clear that they want Maduro out of power and they don't see his regime as a legitimate one, but there's there's very low likelihood that they would actually send in ground forces and try to actually get sucked in a way that would have U.S. forces on the ground for many years. So they're trying to do this at a distance. And what's interesting is that we've seen this kind of strategy being replicated in different areas, like in Iran. They struck the nuclear facilities over the summer. But that was it. There was no follow-up, and the administration sees that as part of a success of their peace through strength strategy, as you mentioned. Where they're trying to replicate this tactic of striking from afar, but also keeping very low risk to U.S. forces.
Is that the kind of strategy then that is being talked about when you take a case of like Nigeria as well? I mean, again, it's kind of difficult at this point to really get a sense of the Trump administration's intent on some of these. But is that the way you would interpret that as well with, say, a threat of striking Nigeria, claiming that Christian minorities are being undermined in the country? I mean, would it be sort of a one-strike thing similar to Iran?
Well, I think in the case of Nigeria, it's probably really unlikely that we're going to see military action. I mean, I could be wrong, but part of this strategy has also just been using verbal threats, like we've seen in Greenland and in the Panama Canal. So we'll see, but I'm pretty doubtful that we'll actually see action there. But I do think, this just the general threats of it fits into that broader picture of projecting U.S. military power abroad for sure.
And when it comes then to projecting U.S. military power, whether verbally or with actions, as we've seen in the Caribbean with the strikes on drug gangs, I mean, how has this gone down with Trump's base? Because he was seen as something of an isolationist before this, someone who wanted to prevent wars. Maybe he's not trying to get the U.S. into a full-scale war here, but nevertheless, it's something different than they might have expected.
Yeah, I think this is the real risk that he's now running into with this strategy. He's facing a bit of a clash within his own party from the hawkish Republicans that do still want to see the U.S. engaged abroad versus restrainers or isolationists who really just want Trump to focus on domestic issues, on affordability. And those calls have only grown louder since, the local elections last week, where Democrats won by a much larger margin than was expected. And, I think there was a bit of introspection happening since then amongst the Republican Party about, well, look, from their view, they've had all these successful missions, foreign policies abroad, but that really didn't have any impact when it came down to the polling. So when they're thinking about the midterms coming up next fall, I think we're probably likely going to see, a fading away from foreign policy as a priority in the run-up to the midterms as a result of that.
Will be super interesting to see how foreign policy is affected by the midterms going into next year. Natalia, thank you very much for joining us today. That was Bloomberg's Natalia Drozdiak out of Washington, D.C. And now here's Laura Kramer in Zurich with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Ukraine says Russia hammered Kyiv overnight with a huge wave of drones and missiles, killing 4 people and injuring more than 24. President Zelensky condemned what he called a wicked attack. He says Ukraine is striking back with long-range weapons, sharing a video of a Neptune launch aimed at Russia. China is demanding that Japan's prime minister withdraw what Beijing calls egregious remarks about Taiwan. China warns Japan it will bear the consequences if it does not. The clash began after Prime Minister Takaichi told Parliament that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could trigger a Japanese military response. And Nintendo has opened its largest store in Japan at Hakata Station in the southwest. The shop sells consoles and character goods and is expected to draw both local fans and tourists. The launch follows the strong rollout from the Switch 2 and comes as Nintendo seeks more studios and hints at new films beyond Mario and Zelda. Those are the day's headlines here in Zurich. Chris, back to you at Midori House.
Thanks very much, Laura, and we will have more from Zurich shortly. But first, it is time for a roundup of stories from Europe and Italy in particular. Monocle's Europe editor-at-large, Ed Stalker, joins us from Milan. Good afternoon, Ed.
Good afternoon, Chris.
Always good to have you on the show. We wanted to start with the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. She's continuing this push for an immigration plan that involves migrant camps in Albania, despite everyone kind of being against her, courts and the European Union. What's the latest?
Yeah, it's a bit of an uphill battle. I mean, this is kind of Italy's very own Rwanda. I'm referencing, of course, the previous government in the UK, the Conservatives, their attempt to sort of outsource the migrant processing to an African nation. In this case, it's a little closer to home, but Italy signed this agreement with Albania for it to process basically migrants that were picked up at sea in Albania. Of course, this is extraordinary in the sense that it was the first agreement between the European Union and a non-European Union country for something of this sort. It was agreed in 2023, but it really hasn't got off the ground for the reasons to which you alluded before, Chris. The fact that Italian courts and European Union courts have both gone against this happening. Even today, they're not really in usage, and Italy's spent something like 700 million euros on this, and they're just being used as repatriation hubs for people whose asylum has failed in Italy. Apparently there's around 20 people there. Italy had these grand plans to sort of process up to 36,000 men, and it hasn't happened. The reason it's back in the news, Chris, is because there was a meeting, a summit, if you like, between Meloni and Edi Rama, who is, of course, the Prime Minister of Albania, yesterday in Rome. And Meloni was really pushing back and saying that, it's been blocked in the past, and these last couple of years have seen these blocks stopping it from happening. But she thinks, despite the fact it has been really a flop until now, that they should be operational by mid-2026, which for some is a very positive reading of the situation.
Well, exactly. I mean, what gives her the confidence when it comes to that? How is she going to push this through despite the courts, despite the European Union's opposition?
Well, there is a change to EU immigration law. Broadly speaking, the EU has its line has hardened a bit regarding immigration, illegal immigration within the bloc. This new law is due to come into force in mid-June, around June, so early summertime. But even if this is a allows perhaps a slightly more liberal reading of what you can and cannot do as an EU member state with regards to an agreement like this. It seems highly unlikely to me anyway that there won't be more problems with the courts. Even yesterday, Chris, Giorgia Meloni, although she didn't say it directly, she did refer to sort of the people who are breaking and blocking this process from happening. And it's pretty obvious to whom she is referring. She is, of course, talking about the justice system. She has not really minced her words about Italian justice in the past. She feels that, the system as it is at the moment is blocking the things that her government wishes to do. Don't forget that I was on the radio not so long ago talking about this reform to the justice system that has now been passed in Italy and is subject to a referendum next year. So people have to vote whether they want it or not, which will see this massive reform of the justice system. The government argues that it will make it fairer. Those who are opposed to it, namely the opposition, say that it will actually allow for more government control. And so when you see these two, the rhetoric from the government about, blocking things like this and these changes to the justice system, perhaps, if these changes do come into force within Italy, she will have an easier ride in Italy. But at the same time, I don't think it's going to be very easy for a number of reasons to get it through, although Meloni, as she said yesterday, is determined to keep pushing through.
Just quickly as well on that, Meloni had been trying, it seemed like, to find a maybe somewhat different way of tackling immigration, even as a sort of right-wing politician over there, working together with North African nations, sort of focusing on development, kind of doing this in tandem with them. She is meeting with Edi Rama. What is your sense of that? Is she still trying to approach this in a slightly different way and say that she kind of has an answer to migration despite all the critics?
Well, look, the Africa thing, Italy under Meloni has tried to project itself as this sort of bridge between the European Union and Africa. If you're a cynic, you'd say, well, yeah, okay, she's trying to create this bridge, but essentially what she is trying to do is make sure that the problems, certainly the people remain in Africa and therefore don't come knocking on the door of the European Union. There may be obviously some potentially positive things that could come out of that if economic conditions were improved in some African countries to the extent that they wouldn't feel the need to make the perilous journey across the sea to European Union nations. In terms of Albania, this is a classic right-wing move to sort of outsource it to a third party, to a different country. You can sort of, in a way, wash your hands of it. I think really, actually, one of the most interesting things to unpack in all of this is the position of Albania, of Edi Rama. He is a socialist prime minister, not exactly an easy bedfellow of Giorgia Meloni, and yet they seem to get on pretty well. And when you unpack it, you realise that it's because Albania wants something out of this. The summit announced a number of new things, including a defence agreement between an Albanian company and Fincantieri, the huge Italian vessel maker. But beyond that, Albania also wants to be part of the European Union. It wants to be part of the club, and it sees Italy as its sort of number one sponsor. So I think it's doing all this in terms of these camps in order to get Italy to sing its praises within the European Union. It's hoping to sort of formally become part of the bloc or speed up its talks in 2027 and 2028. And it's no coincidence that Italy will have the temporary presidency of the European Council at the beginning of 2028. Of course, there will be an election in Italy before that, sometime in 2027. He'll be hoping, I think, that Meloni wins that come 2028.
Ed Stalker, Monocle's Europe editor-at-large in Milan. Thank you very much for joining us to unpack all of that. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing, and we are heading into that time of the year where we shift our focus here at Monocle to soft power and, of course, the holiday season, taking stock of what can only be described as an unusual 2025. And for that, we're joined by the editors of Monocle. Our editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, and Monocle magazine editor, Josh Fennert, are joining us, except not right here in front of me, dear listeners, even though you can't see this, but at our studio in Zurich. Greetings to D90.
Thank you very much. We didn't flee just not to be in the studio with you, Chris. We don't.
I did wonder.
We like you. We like you. But no, we're here doing business, Chris. We're here doing business.
You're here doing business. Are you helping set up the Christmas markets there, Andrew, that are going to be up and running in a couple of weeks?
They very rudely asked me to be at the top of the tree, but I've said no.
Josh, will you be at the top of the tree?
I'm
That tree would buckle if he was at the top.
That's not really my strength, Chris. But if it came to hoying a bit of wood around or needing to erect some temporary structures, I could probably help a bit with that. I'm very good at lifting things.
I mean, don't say that too loudly. You are there, right there in D90. They are going to whisk you away from the studio as soon as this is done.
Well, as you know, Chris, we're always on to the next story, and we're doing planning meetings for the year ahead, and we're celebrating the December-January issue, which will be on newsstands next week. But Andrew and I did have a little time to do a bit of a retail masterclass, to walk around Zurich, to get a sense of the city, and you do see the amazing Christmas markets being put up in the parade plats and close to the opera. So you never know. Even if Monocle don't get me to help, you might find me with a forklift by the end of the day, helping out in Zurich.
Andrew, have you had a Glühwein over there already? I guess they're not quite set up even in Zurich.
No Glühwein yet. We did go for a very nice dinner, a very robust dinner last night here at a place called Kronenhalle, which is highly recommended. A classic for some classics.
So you did, well, Josh, you mentioned the December-January issue. We want to talk about that, but also just in the context, I think, of soft power. That's kind of our thing. And after the top of the show, speaking with Natalia Drozdiak about, Caribbean plans, strikes, and so on, I think it's up to the two of you to sort of calm everyone down a little bit again with this issue coming out. Why does soft power still matter? Give us a sort of positive sense of soft power, Andrew.
Well, soft power matters because, in the end, is a nice way to persuade other countries to support your aims and ambitions. Is to engage with them, to talk to them, to entertain them. And I think that for us, we've always been intrigued by how a good brand, a good car brand, for example, the clunk of a nice BMW door makes people think probably positively, for example, about Germany, or how the popular music and cinema of a country like Brazil, for example, enchants people. And in the end, that's what makes, who really holds a grudge against any Brazilian in the world? It's because they have amazing sport, they have amazing music, they have a good food culture. They're seen as people that you want to engage with. So I think nations recognize that, and whether you're sitting in a government office or in a cultural institution, you wonder, if you're looking out into the world, how do we connect with people? So it's always been a really fascinating topic that we've dived into every single year, and as we do this year as well.
Josh, it did strike me thinking about this and sort of the power of soft power, that even if you take someone like Donald Trump, his determination to win a Nobel Peace Prize, that in itself in some way suggests that there is a nod to soft power. He wants to be seen in that kind of vein, or people even like a Trump want to be seen that way, whether they practice that or not. Not to mention as well that that's sort of a soft power element of Norway. It says something about the power of highlighting peace as well as strength.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only going to seize on the word vain there from your sentiment. I don't believe that Donald Trump's intention is to make America seem like a better partner. That seems to be for the veneration of the individual rather than the country. But I suppose the interesting thing about soft power when we look at it, And, we were the magazine who commissioned the very last piece by Professor Joseph Nye, who died earlier this year, who invented the term soft power, is that it really doesn't happen by accident, and its dynamics don't move in the way that you might expect them to. So it takes years of investing in your chefs, sending them around the world, backing franchises from your country. Before Peruvian food pops up in London and people start ordering pisco sours, and understanding a little bit of the message that you're trying to convey. And, soft power moves in funny ways. It is about the number of Nobel Prizes your country folk win, but it's also about how good your research is. It's about how many Oscars your actors win, and creating the kind of country that creates talent. Japan's had an interesting year, a first female leader. That's kind of politics. But the weak yen has meant that more people have travelled to Japan. They've had more of a sense of what the country has to offer. And everything from its pop stars to its baseball players knocking it out of the park, so to speak, in the US, they create a positive picture, but one that takes some determination and, dare I say, more than the vainglorious ambitions of one man to seize a prize. They are investments in what countries do well. And they're the subtle things that, as we see GDP investment ratios creeping up towards hard power, spending on defence, on missiles, on deterrence, these are the softer things that can cajole you into looking at these countries more positively. And I think that pay off. The final thing I'll say about the dynamics of them is it actually takes rather a long time to destroy a good reputation. Fortunately for people from the US and the UK, where investments are being snipped and unpopular things are being done, France might not have had the best year in the soft power stakes in terms of protecting cultural assets from literal vandals or other things. But our rosy view of these countries comes from long-lived experience, and it does take a long time to destroy a well-earned reputation. So good news for lots of countries this year.
Well, Andrew, on that soft power point then, tell us a little about what's in the December-January issue. I know it's coming out next week, but give us a little bit of a sell. How are we selling soft power and other things for that matter in the issue?
Well, Chris Lexelf, Foreign Affairs editor, has taken charge of looking at soft power, and he's highlighted some of the risers and fallers this year, and I think he's found some glowing reports for Mexico, for Italy, for France and Canada. He's also put a little bit of a fun spotlight on Puerto Rico as well, perhaps not only because Bad Bunny is Puerto Rican and has probably done more to sell Puerto Rico around the world as
won a Latin Grammy, by the way, yesterday.
Won a Latin Grammy, is on every TV show, is loved across America, much to the annoyance of Mr. Trump, who doesn't, I don't think he's the right person to interject in his life. But I think also that we've moved on from just doing soft power in this issue, and there are some other interesting topics. We have a great report though about Denmark and about the ballet there. We go backstage, and again a cultural asset that actually does help Denmark sell itself around the world. We're in Lebanon as we look at how, after many tumultuous years, especially politically and economically, Beirut is pulling ahead in interesting ways, and the Lebanese are an amazing group of people for soft power as well. Lebanese people are all around the world, running institutions, traders, business leaders, food pioneers. And again, despite all the complications that happen in Lebanon, I think when you meet Lebanese people around the world, there's a kind of affection for them wherever they go. They are influential players. So and then finally in the expo pages we have a really interesting story about a meeting point where the Swedes and the Finns come together to talk diplomacy.
And Josh, just finally then, as Andrew mentions, this isn't just about soft power, this issue. It's a big banner double issue, and we even have two covers once again for this issue, a Japanese one and also the one that I'm currently looking at, which has a selection of Christmas jumpers, which I guess goes to our take on hospitality?
Yeah, I mean, I think the illustrator who was commissioned by our editorial director Tyler, it was a discussion, and we said, what are people getting for Christmas? And in some parts of the world, some leaders are ordering and getting tanks, and some people are getting submarines, and some people are getting missiles. So it's an inversion of that idea of Christmas, and we wanted to be a little bit playful with it because it's been an unusual year. And I think the other thing we want to point out to people is that there's some hope on the horizon. We've got our forecast section, which is within this issue, which looks ahead to certain industries, what we should be looking out for, where we should be investing, where we should be moving, where TV formats are moving, how to ignore the relentless churn of new technology and how it's going to change our lives. There's only so many times you can obviously hear that and believe it. So it's an issue that's optimistic about the future, pragmatic about some of the challenges people face, and I hope nudging our readers in new directions and to see the positive side of things, be it soft power or whether they're going to be watching Brazilian telenovelas in English next year.
And Chris, you like a Christmas jumper?
I do like a Christmas jumper, yes. I have a good skiing one, which I need to dig out, perhaps, with like a skier on the front and on the back, sort of skiing across the jumper. How's that?
That's good. And Laura, who has now joined us here, Laura Kramer, is now based here in Switzerland. She's been known of Christmases, in the run-up to Christmas, to be wandering around the office, often in her reindeer antlers. She tells me that she's left them in the drawer for you this year. Are you going to be happy to get your baubles out, get your reindeer antlers on?
I had no idea. I will check that out. I mean, that desk here, we are sad that Laura has left for Zurich, although we always, of course, keep in touch with her there. But her desk is currently occupied by Hassan Anderson, so he might find a surprise for himself in that drawer. But maybe I'll
don't dodge, Chris. Well, I expect to see you fully regaled when I come back.
Fully regaled with antlers and with the skiing jumper. Should I just do a combo?
It's going to be an improvement on what I saw you wearing last time.
Josh Fennert and Andrew Tuck, thank you very much for joining us today. We'll let you get back to the Christmas market setup and other business in Zurich. And that's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Vincent McAviney and Laura Kramer. Our researcher was Joanna Moser and our studio manager was Christy O'Grady. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Have a great weekend, everyone, and thanks for listening.